In this session that I have, I would like to talk a little bit, actually, it's me talking and also you, because I want this session to be a dialogical session. I teach courses on dialogue, and I think the best way to do it is actually to talk not at people, but to talk to and with the people. So that's what we will be doing. I'll be asking a lot of your opinions, because you're all experts in one way or another, and you have your own knowledge, right, of the conflict or war or peace. So in this session, we'll talk about how the war in Ukraine, impacts interfaith dialogue in Ukraine, or in other words, we'll be looking at the role that churches, religious organizations, or interfaith dialogue, it has in the role in dialogue actually is mitigating the conflict. So basically, let's just think about conflict for a moment. I think you've been talking about this for a couple of days now, right? You had different speakers, different presenters. So if you think about conflict, how would we define what is conflict? Anybody can unmute and just say conflict. I think conflict is this. And as you say, if you don't want to talk, you can just write it down in the chat. And I hope I'll be able to see it. But I think the best way to do it is just unmute and say, what do you think conflict is? And as you say it, I'll be taking notes and then expanding a little bit more. So conflict, what is a conflict?
AI?
Yes, sure, Father Vanya.
Yes, conflict is when different interests intersect. When different interests intersect and those interests do not agree, that is what is basically, for me, conflict is in the situation where diverse interests meet at a certain point.
Okay, thank you. Andrei?
Well, yeah, there are many definitions, but the one I like the most and is easier for me to remember is when several people or groups have a perception of incompatible needs.
Okay, incompatible needs or goals, right?
Yeah.
So there is one or more parties, right, or groups of people. Okay, yeah, that's one of the classical definitions, I would say. So they think they have, or they do have, right, incompatible needs or goals. That's a good one. Okay, anybody else? Sister Mary, I see you're unmuted. What is conflict for you?
I can say conflict is disagreement, arguments between groups.
Okay, wonderful. So disagreement, and we also heard this from Father Banya, different interests. So there is a diversity involved, right? We are not on the same sort of page or not on the same level. Anybody else? What is conflict? What does conflict mean to you? Or how would you define conflict? Okay, that's fine. Why do conflicts happen? We already touched this because people think or they have different needs. Let's take some conflicts that we know in the world. We'll come to Ukraine later. Let's say the conflict in Israel and Palestine. What is it all about?
It is about essentially land, about to whom the land belongs. And also it is, we might say, conflict of values in some way, conflict of interests and of values.
Okay,
and
so
land... and unfortunately it is an escalated conflict, which for a long time cannot go into phase of just basically negotiations. It is not like I don't remember how exactly they say that in English, but it is kind of like a тлеющий conflict, like it is a conflict that is in embers.
So it's a conflict habituated system, you can say it this way, right?
Yeah.
The system is so well embedded. I mean, the conflict is so much part of the system that you can't even think about.
Yeah.
Oh, Israel-Palestine, oh, conflict, right? That immediately comes
absolutely,
to your mind. That's unfortunately, right? So you said that the reason for the conflict is land, and land is a resource, right? It could be a resource. And also you mentioned values, I think you said?
Yeah, that's what I said.
What kind of values? So do they have different values or?
I mean, like essentially, if we look at it that in way of like religion, in my opinion, all of the religions, all of the major religions in the world, they kind of propagate the same kind of like the same values with some regional, we might say, with some historical specifications, like that one cannot kill, one cannot steal, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to but not all of the people are quite well, educated, and not all of the people are of high culture. Not all of the people can establish dialogue, and some people that have got power, they may use it in their own ends, and in order to get to the resources, to some to live better, to live off somebody's work probably, and they might use those things that differentiate people in order to let them to let them fight. And we can see that Palestinians and Israeli people, they share some historical buildings, and each and every time the Muslims are trying to celebrate their how to say holidays, yeah, it always leads to some police brutality, to bloodshed, and so on.
Clashes, right? People clash.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same applies, and vice versa, right? When Israeli have got their holidays, that Hamas is starting to fire rockets, and it doesn't seem that either of sides is interested in resolving it the peaceful way. They are simply escalating further and further, and it seems that there is no end to it. And the international community also doesn't do much in order to end it. And some of the reasons is that like United Nations is kind of an
okay, we'll come to that a little bit later.
Yeah,
Sources of conflict, you mentioned that could be land, which could be a resource. People fight for resources, land, water, I don't know, gold, whatever. And then you also mentioned values, and values would be maybe ideals or perceptions that people have.
Absolutely, perceptions of history, for instance.
Right. You see history differently. Putin has his own idea of history, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For Putin, we are all brothers and sisters. We share this great spiritual patrimony, Ukrainians and Russians. We are one big nation, so we should all be together, right? But we have a different understanding of history. So there is a difference, right? So
yeah, and it might also lead to conflicts, as we might see.
Okay, anybody else? Why do you think conflicts happen? What are the reasons for conflicts? So we said differences in opinion, different resource, fighting for resources, right? What else could fall into here?
There is, I can, okay.
Yes, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, Sudan's conflict, Sudan. And I'm looking at it is ethnic cleansing. It's about ethnic cleansing, that one race is not good, they want to finish this race. So there is that part of Sudan. And also in the southern Sudan, I'm thinking it's perception also of conflict of interest because of resources that is found in that part of southern Sudan also. So there are those two main conflicts that take part in the two, South and the other Sudan.
Right, so it's resources, but also some sort of ideology where
Yes.
you perceive the other as a lower human being.
Yeah.
That's why you exterminate, you kill them.
Yeah.
That's why there is
Yeah.
this clash and the conflict. All right, anybody
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, I think that one of the main causes of conflict is the imposition of the ego, that somebody thinks they deserve to know it all, to have it all, or to want to control all. And it is the way, it has to do with the way the person or the people think about themselves in that context. So a sense of superiority, a sense of thinking that the other is inferior, as Sister said, in that sense. So it is about wanting to insert the ego over other people, and that's always one of the causes of conflicts.
Yes, yes, thank you, Father.
I would also add that conflict arises when one part is not ready, or two parts are not ready to listen to each other, or one part doesn't want to listen to each other, and even don't want to hear.
There is no goodwill, as we say, even to listen, right? To understand the other.
Sometimes even one part want to shut up another part, not to listen to it.
Right, right. Sister Mary?
And I also say conflict can also arise because of poor communication. Maybe you are in an institution and you're not able to pass the information well, so it can also cause also misunderstanding between parties. It can also lead to conflict.
Yes, communication is very important. And I'll just give you one example from my personal life. Imagine a situation that we have a house, we live in a village in the countryside, and me and my wife, we like to receive guests, right? But imagine, I mean, if you have children, if we have a party at our house one day, and after the party, it's getting late, people already left, and my wife tells me, oh, can you help me with the dishes? Because we have a lot of dishes. And I say, well, you know what, tomorrow I have the school for ecumenical dialogue and I have to prepare a lecture. So actually, no, you do the dishes and I'll go prepare because I have work to do. And she actually doesn't do it because she's so tired. She has to put kids to sleep. So the dishes are not washed. And tomorrow in the morning, we wake up. There is no breakfast because she's offended I didn't do the dishes. And then she said, takes just kids to school. I don't do it because I have the school to run. She doesn't do it. The kids stay home. So there is a chaos. There's conflict, right? There's conflict, small conflict, you can say, in the family. What would you say the reason for the conflict is? Is it, are we fighting for resources? Are we fighting for some ideologies? What is the reason for this home conflict?
Quite often it might be fight for power. Who
Right.
is?
Okay, because maybe, you know, there is this power ideology, you know, I'm a man, you can do the dishes, you know, it's not me. This can be as well some sort of thinking. What else could be the reason for this misunderstanding? That's a conflict, right? We have a conflict. And everybody's
Ecumenical school for dialogue.
Oh, that's the reason for our conflict, right? Okay, but jokes apart, I think Susanna, you raised your hand before, so you wanted to mention something about the conflict.
Yes, and I think that in some cases it might be just some heritage, because, for example, when I think of Northern Ireland, you know, it's just, I think now there is no real reason to fight. It's just they remember what happened in the past, and I think that's the main reason.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, as I said, the past can be a sort of a trap for many countries, like, again, Russia and Ukraine. You know, Russia wants to have its own version of history. It wants to rewrite history. But, you know, Ukrainians, we have our own history as well. And there is this clash of presenting the history as objective as possibly. Of course, Russia doesn't want that, and it's also part of the conflict. So if you ask about the conflict in Ukraine, what are the reasons for this conflict? it's not easy because it's so complicated. There are many, many ways to answer this question. And of course, Putin is somebody who said that one of the greatest evils of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I mean, if somebody says that, you can expect crazy things from a man like this, who thinks that the collapse of the Soviet Union was like the biggest evil that happened to us in the 20th century. So that's conflict. Let's move a little bit to dialogue. That's the next slide. Do you have any things in the chat?
No,
Okay.
your slides are not switching on our computer.
Oops, sorry. I'm just looking at the chat. I think Magdalena said, I think they can't cut down for a, sorry, that's something different. Conflict at home, unmet needs or expectations. Okay, yeah, people have different needs or expectations. 1 second, I'll move the slide. Dialogue. Let's think now about dialogue.
Taras, you didn't switch the screens on our the slide on our screen.
Oops, sorry. Did it change?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay, let me stop sharing and let's go back. Sorry. So the next slide is about dialogue. So think about dialogue as I switch the slides. So we said a few things about conflict. Now dialogue. Many people think that dialogue is an instrument to resolve conflict. So that could be one of the definitions of dialogue. What else is dialogue about, in your opinion? So dialogue, what are the essential elements for dialogue? Again, anybody can jump in.
No, the same initial file.
Sorry, I just can't figure out the presentation. Sorry. So dialogue, what are the essential elements for authentic dialogue to take place?
Speaking and listening. Listening, or maybe let me put the other way, listening and speaking. First, you listen and then you speak. You listen to understand what somebody is saying and what is essential to that speaker, and then to speak on what you also hold about your opinions without necessarily want to attack the other person. And it is in listening and speaking that dialogue take place.
Okay, yeah, so that's completely opposite to what we've been saying about conflict, right? In conflict, some people don't want to hear the opinion of the other. We don't want to listen. We just want to present what we think is right, right? So that's something opposite to dialogue, to conflict, sorry. Jane, Sister Jane?
It's one way of expressing the feeling, wanting the other person to know what you have to say so that the other person can respond and you come to agreement.
Mm-hmm. So agreement could be part of dialogue, right? And trying to understand what the other thinks, that's also very important. Ksenia?
I think the dialogue can also involve a commitment or a stance of being dedicated to polyphonic and openness, and not just sort of, it's not only going to be one person's voice, whether that's my voice or somebody else's, but you're committed to hearing multiple voices at the table and to have it be an open discussion.
Exactly. So dialogue has this moment of inclusivity, right? You include the voice of the other or others so that you have a platform, right? Dialogue provides a platform for all voices to be heard. Anything else that you think is important in dialogue as opposed to conflict?
Maybe a goodwill.
Goodwill, yes, goodwill, and also it comes with a commitment, as I think Ksenia or Sister Jane said. Now you're committed to something because you have a goodwill for good things to happen, as we don't see in Russia, for example, Ukraine conflict, right? There's no goodwill on the part of Russians to stop this conflict. They just don't want to. Even if they say, no, we open the corridors for humanitarian help to go, but then they start bombing these corridors, which is just unthinkable. I mean, you don't abide by any rules at all. Okay, anybody else? about dialogue? By the way, can you see the change in my slides, or they're still frozen? No? What about now? Can you see it? Oh my goodness. Father Roman, may I send the presentation to you so you can do it? And in the meantime, Andrei can expand on dialogue.
I think it's also about understanding.
Understanding what?
Listening and speaking is not enough. We need to make at least some kind of effort to understand what the other person is trying to say, and make an effort to embrace his or her position. It doesn't mean we have to agree with it, but at least we should try to understand it, and it doesn't mean we have to give up our identity for this. So
yeah, you just mentioned a very important thing. Identity is crucial, I think, in many of the dialogical sessions or in many of the dialogues, because when you come to a dialogue, you bring something with yourself, right? And what you bring with yourself is your identity, and your identity is who you are, right? You also bring your values. Your values also are part who you are. You bring your perceptions of the other. And sometimes perceptions might be wrong perceptions. It's because I never met a person, or because I never known about the history of such and such country. I'll give you an example. Before the pandemic, I used to travel a lot, and I go to different countries, different cultures. In one Western country, I was at the airport, and there was a family with a couple of kids playing around in the airport. And there was another, oh yeah, thank you very much, Father. There was another family passing by, clearly. So the first family was a Western family, the family from one of the Western countries, dressed as Westerners. And that family which was passing, it was a family most likely from Saudi Arabia. So of course the women were all dressed up, right? And this little boy who was playing around, he just ran to the woman who was walking. And what he did, he took up part of her dress, and he just lifted it from the back. Of course, the reaction of the woman was furious. She just turned around and she slapped the little boy. So of course the commotion, the police comes and everybody's screaming. So we had the situation of conflict. The boy starts crying, and then the parents ask, "Why did you do this? Why did you?" They asked the woman, "Why did you hit my child?" Right? And the woman said, "Well, didn't you see what he was doing?" And then they asked the boy, "Why did you do that? Why did you lift up the dress of the woman?" And he said, "Well, I really wanted to see if there is a tail that the woman has." I mean, that was like, think of the perception that some people might have of other cultures. So definitely that happened when this little boy, he was 4 or 5 years old. He must have heard somewhere that, you know, people who are dressed differently, who are totally dressed up, they might have some things like tails. I don't know. So that's a perception. Of course, he didn't do it because, you know, he was evil or something, but because he grew up with that kind of thing, or, you know, he just wanted to see if there is a tail or not. Yes, Andrei. I think you raised your hand, or now you disappeared.
No.
Yes. Oh, nothing. All right, so that's about perception. So when you come to dialogue, you bring your identity, which is your values, your perceptions, your ideas about the other. So that's dialogue. Now I want you to look at the next slide. Father Roman, please help us. And just take a look at these slides and look closely and think for a few seconds, like 40 or 50 seconds. And when you think about this picture, maybe some of you know about this, I don't know. Does anybody know what these statues are? If you do, just raise your hand so I can see if you do know. No, yeah, it's fine. Okay, so just take a look at these two statues, this image, and think about three things. What kind of emotions do you sort of get when you see this? What are the facts that you can gather from this picture? and what would be the values that are present there. So just a few moments, okay? So what are the facts? What is visible? What is factual? What are the emotions that are being evoked when you look at this? And what do you think values are? Okay, anybody wants to start? So the facts, what do you see? It's simple. Facts are the simplest things because what you see
Susanna,
is
no,
what you have,
because
right?
she took part in last year session.
Yes. Oh, okay. Did I have this picture last year?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, so Susanna, you can be quiet. Then you can reveal everything at the end.
May I?
Yes, Father Bani.
Two
Just tell us
different
the facts. What do you see? Facts, right?
two different figures, and it seems one like a male figure, another like a female figure. The male figure seems to be gazing on the female figure, and the female figure seems to be looking down in a way that looks like somebody who is not comfortable, somebody who is shy, or somebody, yeah, some kind of attitude in that category.
Okay. Then are you already coming to emotions, right?
And I see, sorry.
What else? What is, now you're coming to emotions, shyness or embarrassment, but let's stay with the facts. So the facts, you have two figures. One of them is looking sort of down, right? What else? What are other facts that you can tell about this image?
They both look wearing long dresses.
Okay, long dresses, yes. So the way they're dressed. Okay, anybody else about the facts?
I think the male looks to be like a priest carrying a cross.
So where do you see the male? Is it left or right, if you look at the statues?
On my side where I'm seated, he's on my left.
Okay, so that's
Depending where you are seated, he's on my left, and he seems to be carrying a cross, or maybe a symbol, a religious symbol. Let us put it like that.
so in one hand there is a cross, and what do you see in the other hand?
There is a chalice, we'd call it in Catholic Church, or maybe a cup.
Magdalena
Yeah.
says, I think it's two females.
The female might be carrying a handbag, or maybe it seems an envelope or handbag, and also she's also protecting herself, that's judging now, with a stick that's not even straight.
Okay, so that figure, the other figure has a stick, which is sort
Yeah.
of broken, and you said she has some kind of envelope, you mentioned, or a bag? Okay, good. What else? What else can you notice? What do you see on the head of the woman, or the figure, sorry, the figure who is to your left, to our left?
She has this simple, that same, a stick, I don't know whether a stick, coming all the way from the head up to the floor. And it's not straight. I don't know whether it's for her shape. I'm not sure.
Okay, you said this is the stick, but what do they have on their head, on the head? Do you see anything on their heads? Anybody else sees something? It seems to me she's blindfolded. Two female figures, one blindfolded, emotions, okay. Tension, left side judgmental, right side shame, piety, values, purity, knowledge, faith, dignity. All right, that's very straightforward for Andrei. Okay, so what do we see on the heads, if you see anything else? Ksenia says
Yes.
the figure on the left is wearing a crown or tiara or a diadem. Okay.
Okay.
Mhm. And as Andrei said, the figure to the right is blindfolded. Do you see the figure's eyes are sort of closed?
Yeah, and long hair.
Long hair. Okay, so that's a fact. Sister Mary?
Yeah, you have also mentioned the one in the left as a crown, the one in the right as a veil that has covered the eyes, and she doesn't want to look at the other.
She's sort of turning her or turning aside, and her eyes are sort of down, right? Because they're blindfolded. Can you say that this is there is some kind of conflict there or no?
Yeah, I can say there is conflict, and that is why maybe the woman doesn't want to look at the man, or the one on the left doesn't want to look at the man. At the same time, a conflict in a way that the one in the left or right has been tied. So the other one doesn't want to, the one in the left to see what is happening. So they are kind of fighting.
They're fighting. What could they be fighting for? What do you think, Sister Mary? Your imagination. What are they fighting for?
The woman seems to be holding an envelope with money. So maybe she doesn't want to share.
Okay. She takes away the money and she wants to run. But why would she have her eyes closed?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's definitely some tension, right? You can see some tension. Somebody said there is some kind of embarrassment or shyness or shame even because the person is not looking up. Okay. Any other observations that you can see here?
I can also say that there is a kind of confrontation. Maybe she has done something wrong. And that is why she doesn't want to look at the face of the other.
Okay. Some kind of guilt, you could say. So we see there is some kind of conflict, although the statues are statues, right? They're monuments, but you can see there is some kind of dynamics, and the dynamics are not very positive, right? There is some kind of negative vibes about them. There is some kind of tension or conflict. Besides Susanna and Father Roman, do you know what the statues are and what do they represent? Any guess now?
A king and a queen.
A king and a queen. Okay, mercy and justice. Okay, very good. Actually, now revelation. These statues are the statues from medieval Strasbourg Cathedral Church, Christian church, that depict ecclesia and synagoga. So the church and the synagogue, or Christianity and Judaism. And as you can guess, the woman, these are two women, so these are female figures. The woman to our left is representing Christianity. Christianity who has a cross, who has a crown, who has a chalice, which is a reference to the Eucharist in Christianity, in Catholicism. And the woman to the right represents Judaism, religion of the Jews. And actually you can see that that woman has a stick which is broken. She is blindfolded. She has, Sister Mary, you mentioned that's an envelope with money. No, that's not an envelope with money. That's actually a book, the Torah, right? The Talmud, the Jewish Talmud. So that's the way that Christians for many centuries actually understood or viewed, perceived Judaism. So Judaism was inferior, and that was expressed in the architecture. That was expressed in many of the cathedrals. This is actually the facade of one of the cathedrals in Strasbourg. So we see how Christians viewed, the other, Judaism. It's inferior. We are sort of kingly. we are triumphant, and actually this woman to the left, she is triumphant, right? She has this nice standing position. Whereabouts the woman to the right, Judaism, she is blindfolded, she cannot see the truth. So a lot of these perceptions, were present in Christianity, in the Catholic Church. So you can say a lot of anti-Semitic sentiments also come from that. And that's very dangerous, right? Because look what happened. And the conflict happened, which turned out into violence, into the extermination of millions of people. So perceptions are really important, right? How we perceive the other. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this? Because I think this is a very powerful, right? Powerful image of the two statues. Now that for centuries, Christians understood Judaism like that. I mean, that's inferiority. That's totally unacceptable today. And thanks God, we have now totally changed the understanding of Judaism, especially with Nostra Aetate and with other documents of the Catholic Church. Now we say the Jews are our brothers and sisters. And look at the next statue. Father Roman, could you go to the next slide, please? Now you're frozen. Okay, so what do you see here? Again, you see two female figures, and they are on equal footing. They are seated. And importantly, you can see that the figure to the left, that's Judaism, that's representing Judaism. The figure to the right, that's Christianity. They have their books. So Judaism has the Talmud, and Christianity has the Gospels, and they look sort of into each other's scriptures. Can you see it from the picture? So they look sort of nicely in order to learn from the other, in order to learn about the other. And this statue, it's the statue that was actually erected, I think it was 2015, on the anniversary of Nostra Aetate in the United States in Philadelphia. So again, if you go to the next slide, Father, you can just see a huge difference, right, between the two sort of compositions. And you see the progress that the Catholic Church has went from this conflictual situation of seeing Judaism as negative, as something that is inferior to Christianity, to actually seeing Judaism, as a religion that is willed by God, a religion, equal religion. That's why we should not be in conflict, right? We should be in dialogue. And that's why the word dialogue is so much important for the Catholic Church and for many other religions as well. Any comments or questions before we move next to the next slides? From faith, different religious groups, relationships has improved over time. Oh, definitely. And of course, those of you who are familiar with Nostra Aetate, Nostra Aetate was a document that was ratified, proclaimed during the Second Vatican Council. That's the document about the understanding of the others by the Catholic Church, or actually how the Catholic Church views the other. And this document was very revolutionary. It's from 1965, called Nostra Aetate. Don't confuse it with Cosa Nostra. Many people do it, right? So Nostra Aetate means in our age, and it tells that Christians see other religions as important because other religions have elements of truth and elements of salvation present in these religions. Again, we're coming back to the truth because truth is very important, and this is part of our school of ecumenism. And of course, in the Gospel of St. John, we have the Jesus saying, seek the truth and the truth will set you free. If we don't seek the truth, if we don't promote the truth, then what do we do, right? I mean, especially in dialogue. So truth is really fundamental in any kind of conversation. Oftentimes I hear that, the Catholic Church, I'm Catholic myself, Greek Catholic, that the Catholic Church is so dogmatic, it has all these dogmatic definitions and principles. But I think it's important to have some kind of understanding of your belief. Otherwise, I mean, if you don't know what you believe, anything goes, right? So the dogmas, they help us define what we believe. Although some things, for example, like the Trinity, I mean, Trinity is a mystery, right? How do I explain God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and their relationships. I can't really understand that. With Catholics, it's fine. I can talk about the Trinity. But for example, with the persons who come from Judaism or from Islam, I mean, how do I explain to them what Trinity is? I mean, it's so confusing, right? But still, I try to find words just to try to explain it, so there is no theological conflict between us. Okay, before I move on, any questions, comments, or observations? Everybody's happy? Yes, more or less? All right. Okay, Father Roman, can we move to the next slide? Unless there is something in the, okay, Janet. So conflict, I think, Andrei, you captured that well. One of the definitions of conflict, I took it from Abu Nimer. He is one of the professors at the American University in Washington. And he says that conflict is a relationship between two or more parties, individuals or groups, who have or think they have incompatible goals, or may have compatible goals but different means, processes, and approaches. It's a natural disagreement resulting from individuals or groups that differ in attitudes, beliefs, values, or needs. We mentioned all of this already in the beginning, right? Conflict can also originate from past rivalries and personality differences. It is important to know that conflict does not mean violence. However, violence is a method or tool that is sometimes used in conflict. So you can say that violence, is one of the means, or one of the ways that conflict is actually being implemented. Father Roman, could you go to the next slide, please? We talked a little bit about the causes of conflict, so we can go to the next one. I think it will just summarize what we've said, because a lot of you mentioned, there can be a power struggle. I think this is a good list, which sort of helps us go back to what we were saying in the beginning. So causes of conflict could be misconceptions and misperceptions, power struggle, people wanting to be stronger than others, competition for resources such as land or water in some of the parts of the world, or oil, right? It could be greed and the human ego, right? Some people just want to be egotistic, like Putin. He thinks he is Peter the Great. He is the Tsar of this empire, which does not exist anymore. So that's egotistic. Conflicts could be about identity, people having compatible goals. There is lack of dialogue, lack of communication, prejudice, competing interests, lack of tolerance, stereotyping. Stereotypes are important as well. Injustice, lack of knowledge, historical burdens or grievances, or exclusive theology. Now, when we talk about religious conflicts, there are different typologies. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into them. Like we have exclusivism, inclusivism, particularism, and pluralism. And these are four important. Maybe I'll send you the link to one of the articles I wrote about these typologies, so we can read it on your own. Any questions so far? Or disagreements? That's totally fine as well. Okay, perfect. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, so conflicts could be about resources or perceptions, and resources could be power, money, poverty, time, places, interests, and perceptions could be values, prejudice, ego, ignorance, identity, grievances, human nature, or theology of exclusion. Again, these are just some of the tables that actually summarize what we've been saying before. Next slide, please. Okay, it's important to know that perceptions are the way and the lenses that we view and evaluate things in our environment. Perceptions, of course, are product of our environment. Think about that little boy whom I mentioned to you in the airport, right? He was growing up with the perception, that people who has black sort of dresses up to the floor, they have tails behind themselves. So that's a perception that he was growing up, and that caused the conflict when he met the other person. While causes of conflict can either be related to actual distribution and availability of resources or to types of perceptions, nevertheless, it's not possible for us to mechanically separate these causes when analyzing conflict, or even in the actual reality of the conflict. Perceptions shape how we perceive resources, where places and objects mean different things to different people. In this, for example, certain landforms and bodies of water are deemed more valuable to some than to others. In analyzing conflict, it's always difficult to exclusively identify or determine if the causes are either about perceptions or about resources. So it's not easy to give a simple answer to difficult conflicts, right? Because it's sometimes there are more than two things that are at stake. Next slide, please. Okay, yes, the drama triangle. Yeah, let's stay with the drama triangle a little bit. Do you know, have you heard about the drama triangle? I'm sure some people did. Andrei, you must have heard about the drama triangle, right? So what do you say in when you work with the civil society organizations? Does this model still work, explaining the conflict, or it's a little bit outdated? Because in the gist, the drama triangle says that we have three players. We have the victim. Can we go to the next slide? Maybe there is a diagram. Yes. So we have the victim in this drama triangle. Of course, the victim is somebody who is suffering, right? He or she is bullied, or if it's a group of people, then it's them. Then we have a persecutor, who you see on the top left, somebody who is a villain, right? Who is actually causing this trouble. And then in the third corner, you have the rescuer, or somebody who is mediating this whole drama. So Andrei, do you say that this model is still helpful in understanding conflicts nowadays, or do you use something else?
No, personally, for me, it's not very helpful, because I think it can reinforce some of the roles or the stigmas that we assign to different people, and sometimes the lines can be very blurry between a perpetrator or persecutor and the victim, because the perpetrator can be a victim in another conflict scenario. So we mainly use Galtung's triangles when we talk about conflict and violence.
Can you go to the next slide, please? So yeah, the drama triangle, it's something that's used, it was written for transactional analysis, and basically with these three roles, hero, victim, and villain, which actually can be interchangeable depending how you look at the situation. So it's not so helpful actually to understand the conflict. But again, models are important because they help us in a way to understand the dynamics, but some models are better than the others. So again, the drama triangle is just one of these models. And as you said, villains, they feel safe by hurting others and pulling them down. And of course, if you're a villain, most likely you would not say, I am the one who is causing the trouble, right? Because you don't want to admit it. I mean, if you ask like Putin now, right? Are you causing this trouble? And he said, no, these are the Nazis in Ukraine who are causing the trouble. So they are the problem. I'm not the problem at all. And then the victim, if you take the drama triangle as a framework to understand the conflict, victim is really unable to stand for himself or herself and avoid confrontation. So victim is really powerless. Then of course, hero is always somebody, Superman, who feels good about himself because he is saving the situation. A lot of the narratives in the religious sacred texts, they have a lot of these sort of frameworks present, because you always have a victim, right? You always have the devil, who is sort of the villain, the bad, and then you have the savior. For Christianity, for Christians, is Jesus Christ, who came to save us, right? He came to save us from the evil. So also a lot of these sort of drama triangles you can see in the fairy tales. There's always the good, the bad, and usually the good always triumphs. It's in the fairy tales. So you can think about this model of the drama triangle when you read fairy tales next time. Can we go to the next slide? There's also something which is called the empowerment dynamics triangle, and I think it's a much better model. Maybe that's something you, Andrei, mentioned. Let's see the next slide. And in this empowerment dynamics triangle, there is a sort of change of the roles, because the victim becomes the sort of creator who is empowered to create, to come out of this bad situation. the persecutor, the villain, becomes sort of a challenger who challenges the victim. And then there is the rescuer, savior, who becomes sort of a mentor or a coach for the victim, for the creator, which I think has a better approach to understanding conflict. Any questions about these two, the drama triangle and the empowerment dynamics triangle? Is this something, Andrei, you were talking about too, or you still have a different model in approaching the conflict?
No, I'm familiar with this model, but we don't use it that much in understanding or in talking about conflict. We use the attitudes, behaviors, and context or contradiction. And I see other people nodding. Yeah, so I mean, it depends. If we talk about actors, we mainly use actor mapping to identify the people involved in the conflict, and we try to avoid assigning this labels or identification to actors in the conflict, and to understand who they are, what are their needs, interests, what is their, let's say, subjective power in a conflict, how much power they have.
Intentions are important, right? What are the intentions?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm mindful of time now. So Father Roman, can we go to slide number 28, I think? We just skip a couple of slides. A little bit more. Yes, just before that one. So if you talk about one before, if you talk about the conflict and the war in Ukraine, again, for myself and for Father Roman, for many years, we are engaged in dialogue. We bring people together to dialogue about different things, about problems. So I've been asking myself this question, since the full-scale invasion in Ukraine started. So what do we do with dialogue now, right? Does dialogue have any meaning at all? And whom do we dialogue with? I mean, definitely, there is no sense in establishing dialogue with the Kremlin, with Putin, right? With somebody who's killing us. I mean, for them, dialogue does not exist. They don't even have an understanding of the importance of dialogue. I can go to the next slide. So working for many years in this field of dialogue, one of the initiatives that recently we started to do, basically a couple of weeks ago, was an interfaith approach to conflict, to the war. So we created, this will be in 2 minutes of your time, we created this Restart, this interfaith rehabilitation program for victims of the war, the conflict, the internally displaced individuals in Ukraine. And 3 weeks ago, we had like a 1-week training session for the people from different religious backgrounds, different religious confessions. And we did this program. Can we go to the next slide? So we started with online consultations. And the goal of this program, this Restart, I'll send you the link to the video, you can watch it. The goal of this was actually to help participants, the internally displaced people, to deal with the trauma and loss through spirituality, arts, music. And we had psychologists from different religious traditions, who helped them with collective therapy, but also individual therapy. Also, another goal of this project was to mobilize representatives of different religious traditions so they can use their resources, because the churches and religious communities were one of the first to respond to this humanitarian crisis. And also another goal of this program was to equip young people who come from different religious communities so they become those creators of change, of transformation in their local communities, be it parishes or synagogues or mosques. Can we go to the next slide? So these were webinars that we had about resilience during the war. We had top professional psychologists who were giving lectures and webinars for the people, for volunteers. Next slide, please. This is a picture of we had almost 30 people who took part in this program, and mostly students, but also we had mothers with children who took part in this Restart program. Next slide, please. And here you can see representative of Judaism, a woman who was showing some artifacts and talking about the values in Judaism and transformative power of Jewish spirituality. And then below in the picture, you have a lecture we had with a priest who is also a psychologist. And many people who were part of this program, some of them said, you know, we never thought that a priest could be a psychologist, because we always thought that psychology and religion, they are two opposite different things. So this is just something as a case, you know, to show you how during the war we can use interfaith dialogue actually to make some transformative impact in the society. I know we are out of time, but if you have any questions or comments, I would be happy to receive them.